Hi everybody, welcome back to another online lesson. We are going to look today at what it was like for women in Nazi Germany. What were the Nazi policies towards women? What was their role in life? Did it change? And whether or not we think it was effective. Okay, a lovely topic, interesting as well, with lots of lovely facts, making this probably one of the easier ones to discuss in an exam. Okay, so we can start by just looking at this photograph here, this painting rather, and we can see, again, when we think about the propaganda lessons that we looked at and the art that would be approved by the ministry, we can see straight away how this might be approved. We've got the maternal mother, hair in a bun, the clothes, the little girl looks quite dependent, whereas the little boy is by his dad's side, got horses and things, sort of essentially playing I guess boy type things, and the little girl is drawing, just reinforcing those stereotypes. You can see the doll in the corner as well. The older lady in the painting has her hair up, quite traditional clothing as well. So basically, this is just showing the expectation again of women in Nazi Germany and the role of a woman, this caring maternal thing. So that painting gives us a starting point as we go on into this lesson. So let's start, as always, when we look at these things in life in Nazi Germany, what the two people running the show had to say. Hitler said at Nuremberg, one of his rallies in 1934, that if a man's world is the state, then the woman's world is her husband, her family, her children, and her home. It is not correct for women to interfere in the world of man. The National Socialist Women's Movement had one single point: the child. Okay, so that's quite direct. There's no doubt at all about what Hitler thinks about women and women's roles. And he's saying that after he's in power, about a year into power, at one of his big rallies in Nuremberg. And then Goebbels said before the Nazis were in power, so again, no doubt as to what the views were of the Nazis, he said the mission of women is to be beautiful and to bring children into the world. He then goes on to tell this story about a female bird hatches its eggs for him. In exchange, the male takes care of gathering the food and stands guard and wards off, protects from the enemy. So sort of presenting this idea that the man is the protector of the family and the provider for the family. That's the view of the Nazis. Um, uh, Before they even start this sort of life in Nazi Germany, Hitler is obviously saying this when he is Chancellor, but Goebbels is making it very clear to the voters following the Great Depression, coming up to that general election of 1932. This is what we think the role of women will be. So no one was in any doubt, really, or shouldn't have been in any doubt in the election of what was going to happen when they won power. Okay, so two interesting views there, both of which very clear, no doubt at all as to what they think about the role of women. So propaganda, as always, we know from doing the propaganda lesson, and if you're watching this for year 11 revising towards your exams, you should be well aware of this. And also if you're watching this because you missed the lesson, we've already done propaganda. So you should well and truly be aware of the power of the propaganda and this idea of reinforcing the expectation. You can see in this painting here, the mum is breastfeeding. It said mother and child, Mutter und Kinder. You can see in the background, the man is at work in the field, the land. This is just the perfect symbol. She's got her hair up, tied up in a bun. She is a perfect Aryan Nazi mum. So by design, the propaganda is key in creating this expectation. If a woman wasn't doing these things, then she'd stand out and maybe even possibly, if you think about the terror stuff, reported for not doing the expectation. So the Nazis can't just make everyone have children and be this mother. They've got to persuade them in some way, be it by fear, be it by propaganda, maybe a little bit of both, really. So this is the environment that young girls and women are growing up into. And if you think about the 1920s, in the golden years, Stresemann's years, the freedom and the liberation that a lot of women felt, you know, the sexualization of the period, getting their own little jobs, this is the polar opposite. But remember, in that story too, there was women who didn't like that. They didn't want that kind of lifestyle, the traditional views, or a lot of young girls felt under pressure to have to fit into that. So this is an interesting story. If you just sort of flip in the sides a little bit, there will always be some women who want this and there'll always be some women who don't. But now the case is there's less choice than there was maybe in the 1920s. Okay, so first little task, pause the video and look at these images and just write a little inference wherever you're doing your notes about what you can infer from these pictures about the role of a woman or a girl in Nazi Germany. When you've done that, unpause the video and we'll carry on. Right, so hopefully you've noticed from the first one, the young girl holding the can is that she's out obviously collecting charity, knocking on doors, but essentially giving us the inference that the girls and the women were expected to look after the money, perhaps, or the household budgets, maybe, things like that. The second picture, we can see mum and daughter cooking in the kitchen. This is probably no different to what was going on in England, in Britain, and all over probably the world. That the young girls would be doing the household things at this period. She's learning to cook. So the role of a woman, she's learning from a very early age, is in the kitchen. We can also see the sporty ones, the ladies sort of standing straight up doing sports. We can infer from this that the women in Nazi Germany looked after their bodies. You'll know at the end of this lesson that they were expected to and encouraged to in order to have as many children as possible. The bottom two, similarly, I think we've seen the one with the on the right hand side before. This perfect Nazi family, the ideal, the mum dressed normal, being a mother, the dad is working. The representation of the boys doing sort of boy toys and playing, and the girls doing the care and stuff. So that's the kind of inferences that we're looking at, and the attitudes that just support basically what Hitler and Goebbels said in their sources we've just previously looked at. So hopefully you got some of those points. If you didn't, add them to your own notes. But it's an interesting way to start this topic. Then we've got these three words that you'll become very familiar with after this topic, that the Nazis have got this purpose for women: Kinder, Kirche, Kutsche. Okay, the images speak for themselves, but that is the three words that we'll use to try and remind ourselves what the role of a woman will be. So Kinder, child; Kirche, just a good church, religious wife doing as she's sort of told, I guess; and Kutsche, kitchen, cooking, things like that, the home. So that are the three main bits of the women in Nazi Germany. So you are expected to follow these things. I suppose for this lesson, and the best way to make me do your notes in this lesson is just subtitles as we go through of all of the policies that the Nazis introduced towards the women in Germany. You'll see how that works in a minute, because each of the slides will just have a little subtitle. That's the easiest way to do it, but try and think about, as we go through these things, good or bad. Are they examples of women enjoying it, not enjoying it, being successful, not successful? Obviously, this would lend itself perfectly to a Section B topic, wouldn't it? One interpretation that women liked it, others that women didn't, or one interpretation that the policies were successful towards women, and maybe one that suggests they weren't. So quite an obvious two-sided topic, this one. So just try and keep that in mind as we go through, and you'll see what I mean in a minute when you see the subtitles. So this little diagram on the screen, I think maybe worth just taking a sec to read it. If you're watching this because you missed the lesson, do the little summary task. Those three boxes into maybe one sentence each. I mean, the appearance one kind of speaks for itself, but just summarize the gist of what the role or expectations of a woman were, and then when you're ready, unpause and we'll carry on. Okay, so this is my little summary in one sentence about what women were expected to do. Hopefully that was clear for you. It's obvious, I think, so far. This is not difficult. The challenge in this topic comes with just the remembering some of the examples that you can use. Okay, so this is a little post-it note that we will stick in your book if you were in class, but just have a read of it. You don't have to do anything with it, but these are just examples that you could talk about or think about, and maybe before we go into this topic that you can keep in the back of your mind of what the expectations were of women in Nazi Germany, how they should look, how they should act, what they should do at home, how they should dress, all of those things. Basically just a little bit extra on the task previously. Okay, so have a little read of them, pause the video, and then when you have read them, we'll carry on. Right, so policies towards the women. This is where you can start doing little subtitles with just a few bullet points for each one, just to help organise your notes and make sure you fully understand them. Initially, straight away, when the Nazis came into power, they set up the Women's Enterprise. This was an organisation like anything else, the ministries that we've seen previously, where they give all women's groups are controlled by this women's enterprise. So that could be any women's group. I don't know, bingo, how to cook, iron, sew, whatever it might be, you had to be part of the women's enterprise. So in other words, you had to be part of this Nazi organization. Again, it's probably part of the control thing. And any women that didn't, obviously, again, they would stand out. So the DFW, Women's Enterprise League, they delivered courses on childcare, cooking and sewing. About 1.7 million had attended these courses by the time of World War II. So maybe you could see that as an example of some success. But the point here is it was about control and making sure that women had to get involved. And then this Gertrude Schulze-Klinker, she became the women's leader of this women's enterprise. And she said in 1936, so 3 years into power, not only will women with children become mothers of the nation, but every German woman and girl will become one of the Fuhrer's little helpers, wherever she is. So again, this is promoting that idea or expectation of what a woman should be doing for the Fuhrer and for Germany. And of course, if she isn't, then why not? So Gertrude Schulze-Klinker was not very popular. We'll see later on in this lesson with some of the sources, but she is one of the only women who was given a prominent position within Nazi Germany. We know that Leni Riefenstahl was given quite a prominent role in the propaganda and the film making. So we've got two women as maybe examples, but out of the whole nation, it's hard to say that they are shining beacons of women's freedom and liberation. So keep her in mind. She is the one in charge of all of these things. Now, to think about, before we go forward, the government have got a bit of a problem. As we know from Stresemann's time, in these golden years, the birth rate was fallen, and we need the birth rate to be up, obviously, for workers and to pay for pensioners and all those things. So by 1933, birth rate had fallen to about 1 million. This meant fewer German workers, soldiers, and mothers. Can you come up with at least 5 ideas in your book or on your notes now how you might solve this problem before we look through the rest of the lesson? All right, so come up with some ideas on what you would do if you were the government to try and increase the birth rate. Okay, when you've done that, unpause the video and we'll go through some of the policies and see if you were correct. Okay, so subtitle number one, the law for the encouragement of marriage. 1933, it should surprise you straight away as they get into power. The law for the encouragement of marriage. As I've just said, they can't force people to have kids and get married. So they're going to try and change the law. And in this case, it's quite explicit to encourage people to get married. Maybe you thought of some of these things. So just in your notes, just write these bullet points. The loans were worth up to 1,000 marks. This was about 8 months' wages. So that's a lot of money when a young person got married. So when these people got married, they got this whopping big check or whatever, this amount of money, 8 months worth of wages in one go. The loans are only available though if the woman gives up work, so stay at home and look after the children. So you can see how it's deliberately encouraging women to get out of work and the men can then take those jobs. Every child that they had, up to 4 or more, they got a quarter of the loan written off. So as soon as they have 4 kids, they don't have to pay that money back. That would definitely encourage people to have children as soon as possible because obviously you're going to get this free money. If you're not having the kids, then I guess you have to pay the loan back and that's probably quite expensive. And then finally, a woman could often earn more than her husband by having more children. So she's getting all this money, and we'll see a source shortly, where she was saying that she's earning more than her husband at working because she just kept having kids. The idea was to encourage people to have kids in our country. We have family allowance and things like that and child family tax credits. So people do get help when they have children from the government, which I suppose probably somewhere in there was designed to encourage people to have children to help the rotation and process of work and pensions carry on. So this is quite obvious. I'm presuming probably you've considered something in your ideas a second ago on how to encourage people to have kids. But this is quite a nice, straightforward fact for you for a paragraph on how they did this. Maybe a 12 marker, explain why the Nazis were able to improve or whatever the life of women in Nazi Germany. Whatever the question might be, this would be one of your answers. Okay? So secondly, we have divorce laws. They're introduced as well. So if a woman would not or could not have children, then the husband could divorce her easily. All right, so the process would be very simple. If she wasn't doing her duty, then she could be divorced. If a woman had an abortion, again, the husband could divorce his wife for her actions. So we can see here that this is very much patriarchy and the man is generally in control of all of this. But the woman is expected to produce and do her duty. And if she isn't doing her duty, then the man can get rid of her. So we can presumably go and find a woman who will. All right. I'm not sure how that would necessarily work if you've had your loan and it's been a couple of years. Probably, I'd imagine you'd have to pay that loan back if you'd failed to do your duties. But of course, the idea was that you had kids. So if she's not having kids, then I guess that answers the question, doesn't it? All right. So there's the first 2 little bullet points on how the government have tried to encourage people to get married. And then if they're married, there's a very high chance that they're going to have kids. That's probably the backstory to all of this. Then the Mother's Cross. This is quite cool, this is. So for every child you get, or every sort of milestone you get to, the Mother's Cross is awarded, all right? So if you have 4 to 5 kids, you get a bronze badge. 6 to 7 kids, you get a silver, and 8, you get a gold. And anyone who's walking around with a gold badge, or any of the badges really, the Hitler Youth, if they see them in the shop, in the co-op, in Tesco's or whatever, they would salute the women who are wearing the medals, especially the gold medals, in some way of publicly praising them. And any woman who sees this happening and they perhaps haven't got the medals, they start to stand out, don't they? They're not doing their duty. So all of this is designed to single out people who aren't doing it, but also single out those who are, for praise. So Hitler Youth kids are obviously everywhere. They're learning to do this, and they do. Women who had 10 were expected to name the 10th Adolf, and Hitler would be the godfather. Now, I don't suppose there are many kids walking around called Adolf, which would imply, wouldn't it, that not many people managed to get to the 10. And bear in mind, he was only in power really from 33 to 39 before the war started. So that's quite, you'd have to have a lot of pregnant, you have to be pregnant basically for the whole time the Nazis were in power, and probably have at least a couple of sets of twins for that to happen. But, you know, it was possible, and this was another thing that would be like an honour bestowed on the woman who was doing this. What a great hero. All right, so this is the picture of the medals. This would be given to them in like special ceremonies, and this source is just really helpful in giving us the real life again. We know that sources are brilliant in telling us what this was like in real, not just from a textbook. So we can see here that this woman here, Haferkamp, she was from a city in Oberhausen, interviewed in the 1980s, and she's describing the benefits she received for having many children. She eventually gave birth to 10. So we can see from this source that it was possible. She got 30 marks per child from Hitler and 20 marks from the city. She says that was a lot of money then. Sometimes I got more child money than my husband earned. I was proud. When I got the gold Mother's Cross medal, there was a big celebration in a school where the mothers were all invited for coffee and cake. So that tells it better than the bullet points on the screen, because this is real. This is a woman's experience of it, and she's referring back to this when she's saying it in the 1980s. So she obviously still feels quite proud of that. She was proud of it. They were proud of it because they've been, I suppose, made to feel proud of it because of the propaganda and the pressure. So that's a nice little story. And again, most people, when they do this topic, they do remember the Mother's Cross. They remember it probably because it's a bit silly, for the medals and the saluting, the kids saluting you everywhere you go. So that is another nice one to encourage people to have children that will become one day, obviously, soldiers. And then this one's a bit more sinister. Lebensborn. This, you can see there with the symbol that it's something to do with the SS. We can see that from the lightning bolts. So Lebensborn was started by Himmler in 1935, which provide nurseries and financial aid for women who had had children with SS men. They encouraged single women to breed with SS men to create genetically pure children for the worthy German families. Now, this, you could look at it in some ways. Some women who are struggling to find the husband could go to these Lebensborn places and be made pregnant to breed. Now, ideally, you'd be an Aryan, breeding with an Aryan. Remember, to be in the SS, you have to be the best, the elite, generally Aryan. So this way, they're going to be producing these perfect Aryan children. I'm sure we can work out this is probably a little bit more sinister than just people going by choice, perhaps to breed with these SS men. But I guess what we can say from that is it was just an effective way to make women who are not doing their duties do their duties and have a child. And of course, if they're not married to them, they've just been made pregnant, then you've got these nurseries and stuff who will support that. It clearly seems more important that the children are being born than into families, although families would be ideal as well. Okay, now if you're watching this on catch up in the Google Classroom, there'll be a little clip for you to watch about this, and if you saw it in class, you'll have seen it in year 11. Otherwise, don't worry about that clip. Okay, so some other policies that we can tag onto this. We've got 4 main ones. Hopefully they're really straightforward, but other ways they did it, they made abortion illegal. So if you got pregnant, you had to have the child. Contraceptives were restricted. Maternity benefits, as we've seen, were improved to encourage women to have the babies, particularly women who maybe couldn't afford it or were worried about the cost of it. The government was definitely going to step in and help. Family allowance was improved, and infertile women could be divorced easily. So a woman who can't be pregnant, regardless of whose fault it is, it may even be the man's fault, but she will be divorced and he can move on. Even women who had been made infertile by their husband passing on an STD could be divorced easily as well. And then, as we've said, this constant glorifying of the mother image. That's what this was all about, okay? If you weren't doing it, you weren't doing your duty and your role. So this source here from an interview with Gertrude Drober in 2001, in which she is remembering what it was like to be a young woman. She says, young girls from the age of 10 onward were taught to take care of their bodies so they could bear as many children as the state needed. Birth control information is frowned upon and practically forbidden. So any advice on how to not get pregnant, that was out of schools. My main aim as a woman was above all to become a mother. So she's grown up and she wants to do this. She's been brainwashed into thinking this is the way to be, this is the glory. I wanted to be a perfect housewife. I wanted to do something different with my life, not just be a working girl in an office. So she has definitely bought this hook, line and sinker from the Hitler Youth sessions and the education in school. But there you go, it worked. That's one example of how this was effective. So women being sterilised, this is a story that isn't particularly nice, but it's just interesting to take a sidestep to start looking at some of the reality of this thing. So we're in this place where we prove that our interest in the child begins before he's born. This is the Frauen Clinic, so women's hospital, a city hospital for women. We climbed some stairs and entered the second floor gallery, separated from an operating room by a glass wall. Down below, 6 doctors were hard at work. So they're looking down, imagine looking down into a, I guess, operating theatre type thing at these doctors. What I saw drove the blood from my face. Hospital beds came and went with methodical precision, in one, out the next, in, next, and so on. The doctors made quick, deft incisions in the white abdomen walls, so inside the ladies. What are they doing, I asked. These doctors, he said, are sterilising women. I asked what type of women and was informed they were the mentally sick, women with low resistance, women who had proved through other births that their offspring were not strong. So maybe they produced a child with Down syndrome or learning difficulties or a physical disability. They are not allowed to have any future children. And you'll know, if you are watching this for revision, of the T4 program that would come into play about this as well. And if you are watching this for the first time because you missed a lesson, we'll do the T4 program very, very soon, and you'll understand how the whole thing links together. They even say we're eradicating colour blindness. My SS guy told me we must not have soldiers who are colourblind. It is transmitted only by women. So you can see there's a process behind the scenes that is trying to stop imperfect babies being born in order to create this master race. That's always the sort of underlying thing with this. So that's more sinister, isn't it, than giving people a medal for having kids. Okay, so this task obviously is one that you can do however you want, whether you do in your notes on Google Doc or in your book. Just look at each of these boxes and do a key and try and colour code them into one of those categories on the left. So are they related to home and babies, employment, marriage and appearance, or other? Maybe you can name the other if you want. I would just write them like this. If you are watching this because you missed a lesson, this document will be in the Google Classroom as well. Okay, so just these is just are just examples to help you get some facts again, get to help us with paragraphs or to help us with some own knowledge in a source question that we may get if this is section B. All right, so pause the video, have a go at that. This might take a little bit of time if you're writing them all by hand, so summarise them. You don't need to write every single word, but just try and categorise where all the policies are essentially leading to. Are they about babies, employment, marriage and appearance, or something else? Okay. So women and employment, this is probably another subtitle or like a separate section to this lesson, if you like. This is about their jobs. So propaganda was used, as we've seen from the very start of this lesson, to persuade women that they should be at home and not working. That is their role, to be at home. These images that you can see above are to glorify those that are doing the right thing, always showing the mum as this caring maternal figure, the hero of Nazi Germany, almost to the point of saying they're probably more important than the men in some ways, and that would obviously make these women feel really good and really proud. So that's what they're doing there, really. And I guess anyone who is not having kids, they become questionable. Remember, with the terror stuff, people might start reporting you to the Gestapo because you don't seem to be having kids or don't seem to want kids, which means essentially you are against the Nazis. From 1933, women were banned from being teachers, doctors and civil servants. By 1934, 360,000 had given up work. So we can see that as an example or evidence of success. The Nazi policies have clearly worked. That's a lot of jobs that will now be going to men. All right, remember at the time the Nazis take over, there are about 6 million people unemployed from the Depression. So there's a huge chunk of men taking on those jobs that were done by women. Really perfect policy, good examples of how this is working. Then in 1936, no woman could be a judge or a lawyer, so those high-up jobs. And if they were a judge or a lawyer, they would have lost their job. Schoolgirls are trained for motherhood, not working, so that's the message within school. Again, if you are watching this in revision, this works perfectly in tandem with the education lesson and Nazi schools. Again, if you're watching this because you missed a lesson, we'll do the education in the next couple of lessons. 1937, all girls' grammar schools are banned. There's no need to go to university or have a formal education because your role is going to be wife and mother. All right, so students have fallen from 17,000 to 6,000. There's not a lot of girls going to university, it's got to be said, but that's a huge decrease. Good examples of how the Nazi policies maybe were effective or successful. Whether we agree with it or not, the numbers speak for themselves. Those women are now at home, having children and families. So in that sense, it's worked really, really well. Okay, so for the next bit, do a little table like this in your notes or in your book or however you're doing it. Women's lives are better, women's lives are worse, a smiley face or sad face, however you want to do it. Remember that this is for preparation for a source question or section B, where we might get one interpretation that says women's lives got better under Nazi Germany or women's lives got worse. Perfect, obvious, two-sided argument for a section B. Okay, so everything we do from now on, and probably in fact everything we've done so far, you could put them into a table, good or bad examples. Okay, so that's how we're doing it. Let's start with these two sources then. So Traudl Junge was a young woman in Nazi Germany. Here she's remembering her youth in Nazi Germany. She says, Gertrude Schulze-Klinker, that woman who's in charge of the whole thing, was the type of woman we did not like at all. She was so ugly and wasn't fashionable, probably because she was a perfect Nazi with hair up in a bun. We didn't bother about joining her organisation. It didn't attract me or my friends. We were interested in dancing and ballet and didn't care much for the political ideas. So this is a really good insight, isn't it, to think about that not all women and girls bought this and went for it. So we can write there what the suggestion there is. It's quite clear, but make sure you pick out a sentence from the source whilst you do this task. It's always good habits because that's going to be the content, isn't it, in a source. And then we've got this other source underneath, which is an extract from a letter to the Leipzig newspapers in 1934. A son, even the youngest, laughs in his mother's face. He regards her as his servant and women in general as merely willing tools of his aims. So clearly, after just 1 year, the message is getting through to the boys that is essentially the role, or at least this source suggests that's how some men and young boys were taking this, were interpreting these policies that a woman, her role was to be servant and he was the master. That's quite not a kind or nice thing to read, that source, because he's a young boy laughing in his mother's face. There's no respect there, is there? And he's obviously getting that view from somewhere. So just take a little bit of time to look at these things and write a sentence or two, whatever you think you need to, about what these two sources are suggesting about being a young person in Germany. Give a bit of evidence from both, and then when you're ready, unpause and we will carry on. So the effectiveness of the policies, this picture, I love this source. It's really interesting because you could tell a whole story if you break it down and look at each little bit. So you do that first of all, pick out what you think you can see. Presumably in the middle is Gertrude Schulze-Klinker. But just see all the different bits. Don't just focus on one bit. Try and step back and look at the people in the crowd, people in the background. There's a photograph, a painting of Hitler. What is going on, you think, in this picture? When you have done that, or at least thought about it, we'll carry on with some of the observations you probably have made. Okay, so we can see that the people in the bottom are all men, pretty much. I think I can maybe see one woman second in from the right. This is obviously a celebration of some sort of gathering. There's women in the background who look quite proud the way they're standing, and important people up at the top looking down. And this woman is being celebrated in some way, but look at her. So Hitler's there, the painting is there to show that we're doing this for the Führer. It is a negative, definitely, because look how Hitler's presented. You know that this source would not have been produced in Germany because it's made Hitler look a bit silly with his long face. And this woman has been sort of dragged up and she can barely walk. She's being carried up by two other women. The suggestion here, I think, is that she's having so many kids that she's just done in. She's absolutely knackered. Their body is done in. But here she is being celebrated, probably in reference to getting a gold medal or something. So she can't even walk up herself, but there's a celebration of her role. This is the kind of source that you can imagine is being done outside. Okay? So the message of the source is clear. Just write what we've just talked about if you didn't get any of that before when you had a look yourself. The message is clear. It's sort of having a bit of a dig at the policy of women having babies. This woman is knackered, but here she is being celebrated. Okay, and remember, this definitely would not be a source in Nazi Germany. If it was, they wouldn't last very long. Okay, so the policies, then a little summary of everything we've talked about. This is your O, the own knowledge bit for section B, two interpretations, or the source question. Anything on the effective side, you would say this source is useful because I know that. And it might be a source that shows that the Nazi policies were effective, or it might be a source that shows they were not effective. But just take the time to understand what we've talked about so far. This is exactly what you need to be including in your content. Okay, so let's think about the effective then. So some women persuaded or maybe conformed to get into line and do these things. That would show success. Fewer women are going to university. We've seen that fact, and more women have given up their jobs. We've seen these facts already. Birth rate has increased, and more men have got jobs. So overall, we've got quite a lot to say there if we're going to argue that we're supporting an interpretation that the policies were effective. On the flip side, many women did not support Nazi ideas about womanhood. Some felt they harmed the family and degraded women, which we've seen with the boy, the way he's laughing in his mum's face. Some women hated the Reich women leader, Gertrude Schulte-Klinker. She was just brutal, aggressive. And by the end of the 1930s, and this is probably the biggest one to take note of, the policies were failing. Whatever it might be, as we're getting towards war, maybe, I don't know, but there weren't enough workers, so the Nazis had to undo all of the policies to allow women to go back to work. They even sort of gave clauses in the contracts that if you hadn't had your kids yet, you could still go back to work because they needed workers. So that is a really good example right there that these policies probably didn't work quite as well as the Nazis had hoped as the 30s went on. But overall, this little table here, make sure you've got this noted if you haven't organised your notes already. If you don't want to do it in a table form, you could go back through all the notes you've made and just put a smiley face next to anything that you think shows success or negative, obviously vice versa. Your notes are your notes, and it's important that you understand what it is that you're trying to say. Always remembering in this Germany paper, you're looking for two sides, because that is generally where most of your marks are going to be. And of course, the other question is a 12 marker, so you're looking at reasons why something happened. Okay, so I don't know what this might be off the top of my head. This could be explain why for a 12 marker. Nazi policies, I don't know, increased birth rate or lowered unemployment or something. This could be just one of your paragraphs. Okay. Hopefully that makes sense. If not, ask your teacher or come and see us. So the policies being effective, again, we look at this source here. We can see the woman is tying up this brutal guy's boots. She looks sort of done in a little bit. She looks tired, a little bit sort of scruffy looking. This is definitely an interpretation, I think, that women were seen as servants, maybe, not equal, not having a good, happy life. Do you agree with that interpretation? Thinking about everything we've talked about in this lesson so far? If you do, maybe say why, some of the information that we've talked about, and if you don't, say why. Obviously, this is the section B 20 marker. Do you agree with one of the interpretations, even though you have to do both, how they're both correct? You could get plenty out of this one here, that this sort of soldier guy is, this woman is a servant, basically. Okay, so again, a little summary just to bring a close to the effectiveness of the policies. As we've said, industry expanded so much that they needed women to return to work. Policies were reversed. Women were made to work for a duty year in 1939 because they expected to. That's what they called it. Maybe a bit like sort of being forced to sign up to the military when you were younger. These women had to do their year, more so because they needed them. And then by 1939, 7 million women were working, which is still less than it was before. But remember, the Nazis wanted all women at home. So definitely good examples in your not effective section of any answer that you might give. All right, so these are just interesting things to think about. You don't need to necessarily write any of these things down. These are just things that I've found over the years that make this whole story interesting. That when you are getting married, you have to consider these 10 rules. That you are German. You must remain pure in mind and spirit. You must keep your body pure. If hereditarily fit, do not remain single. So in other words, if you're able to have children, do not remain single. This is obviously what they're going to be learning in school as well. Marry for love. That's interesting, isn't it? You're marrying for kids, basically. But if you can, make sure you love the person. More likely going to stay with them. Being a German, only choose a spouse or similar or related blood. Again, you're learning that in schools and in the Hitler Youth to make sure you don't marry some out of Aryan creed or something to, I don't know, dilute the master race. When choosing your spouse, inquire into his forebears, so his parents, grandparents, and so on. Ask questions. Where are they from? What do they do? Who are they? Because obviously you're trying to find out there if there's going to be some negative genes this is crazy stuff. It's interesting, but it's crazy stuff that these are what women are being encouraged to think about. Health is essential to outward beauty as well. So they're always encouraging you to be healthy inside, eat well, don't smoke, all those kind of things, because they're the things that are going to help you be a good mum. Try and seek a companion in marriage, not just a playmate. I guess that's the idea. That's what everyone wants, isn't it? We all want that in our marriages and stuff. Someone that you get on with, someone that is good, fun to be around, not just someone who you can, I don't know, hang out with, or maybe whatever this is implying. And then 10, hope for as many children as possible. Your duty is to produce at least 4 in order to ensure the future of the national stock. So I just find this fascinating in the whole story, really, as a little sidestep from the lesson, just to think about what young girls are being encouraged to think about. It's nothing like what you're encouraged today to think about, is it? Just fascinates me, really, how the whole thing worked. So this is from the German Racial Policy Bureau in 1934. So it's official documents, official stuff that is being passed on to these girls, just for no apparent reason, just to be clear. Okay, now it would be a useful time for you to pause this video and have a source question practice. Okay, now do this properly, and if you do it, or when you do it, hand it in to be marked. Okay, but the question is an 8 marker: how useful are sources F and H for an inquiry into attitudes of Germans towards Nazi policies for women? So we've got 2 sources that we've kind of seen already in this lesson. But work out obviously which one's positive, which one's negative in this case. I think it should be clear. And then do a cop paragraph for each. All right. So source F is useful for an inquiry into blah, 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 blah. Source F says, and then quote, that's your C. Add some own knowledge from this lesson that supports that quote, and then consider the the provenance of the source and how that makes it useful. So this would be the same question as in the trenches paper, remember, and in the first question of section B. Now, we're not going to go through a model answer in this lesson for this, but I would like you to have a go and hand it in because it's good practice. But remember, while you're doing this, just keeping your thought onto section B. If this was the section B, then question 3B and 3C would be interpretations. And remember, 3C will ask you, why are the interpretations different? And you're going to say, because they're based on different sources. So with this task, once you've done this task, you should be able to work out or predict that interpretation 1 will match one of these sources and interpretation 2 will match the other. So as long as when you're doing the source question in Germany, you've got your mind, just half a mind's eye on the next 2 questions coming along, that you should be very quickly able to say, the view of interpretation 1 is this, the view of interpretation 2 is this, and then they're different because they're based on different sources. In this case, one source is very negative and one source is positive. Okay, one is very much in support of the whole thing. So do your question. It's really important that you practice these things, especially the source question. In fact, all of section B, because it's a skill, because there's a script involved. This is where you're going to make sure that you get your full marks, which then takes a little bit of pressure off the essay questions where, you know, they might not get a question that you particularly like. In this case, though, the script always pretty much stays the same. As long as you follow the script, include your quote, include your knowledge to back that quote up, and then some provenance, you should be okay. Make sure you're detailed, though, in order to get your full 8 marks. So see them both as 4 marks each. You do not need to compare them. You don't need to say one is better than the other, but make sure you're saying how they're useful, because all sources are useful. It's whether or not you think they're very useful, incredibly useful, or just slightly useful. I don't know, something like that. So remember to stay positive as well. We don't want to be criticizing the sources. That's not what we do with the source question. You may be able to do that in the interpretations 20 marker, where you're saying this would be better if, and this is why I prefer interpretation 2, because it seems to be more broad or balanced. In this case, you are trying to be as positive as possible. So do that, unpause the video, and then we'll finish off the lesson, and make sure you hand in the source question that you do. If you're typing it on a Google Doc, then just send it over to your teacher.